Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Pico Iyer about Aflame, learning from silence. It's about the power of silence and what it can teach us about how to live. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Pico Iyer is the best-selling author of more than a dozen books, including The Half-Known Life, In Search of Paradise. His writing has also appeared in over 250 publications worldwide. He joins us to talk about Aflame, learning from silence. Pico, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm really happy to talk to you again.
Well, tell us about the inspiration behind this latest book.
In some ways, it was a curious inspiration because I lost everything in the world when my family home burnt down in the hills of California many years ago. And so I was sleeping on a friend's floor for many months as we were slowly reconstructing our lives. And another friend saw me there and he said, if you're sleeping on the floor, why don't you go to this retreat house 4 hours up the coast? At least there you'll have a bed to sleep in and a desk and a private garden, all for $30 a night. And so that's how I found my way to a Benedictine monastery. And even though I'm not a Christian, that monastery has changed my life. I've been more than 100 times over 33 years, and the monks have become some of my closest and most inspiring friends.
Well, I want to talk about those experiences in a moment, but since we won't have time to talk about everything that's in the book, give us an overview here. What are readers going to find?
I hope they're going to find silence and calm and liberation in an ever more speedy world, because that's what I find every time I step into that monastic silence, which is not just a freedom from noise, but it's almost like a positive thing. Suddenly I'm away from all the chatter in my head and all the clamor around me in my daily life. I remember what I love. I remember what I should be doing. And I return home really a calm, much calmer and more joyful person. And in this world of division and distraction, I think many of us are longing just for the chance to step out of our crowded life, to let the essential rise to the top, and then to return with a much clearer sense of what's important.
Now, you mentioned that you were not Christian, and you referred to a variety of religions and philosophers and some people who weren't religious at all, because they all have something to say about silence and the value of silence. So tell us a bit about some of these people you quote and kind of what they all have in common.
Thank you, Dan. I mean, I think the reason I stress silence is it's non-denominational and it's available to all of us. And I feel these days, quite often, our world and our lives are cut up by our ideologies and our words. And I believe this and you believe that. And suddenly we're at odds. But when we're joined in a moment of silence, I think we're united in something much deeper than our beliefs and our assumptions. And not just our common humanity, but our common sense of something beyond all this. And so, as you say, it's very touching to me that my Catholic monk friends open their hearts and doors to everybody of any religion or no religion at all, because they know whoever you are, I think in silence you will find what is most essential to you. So as you say, I quote lots of writers and people from every tradition to suggest that just anyone who sits down and clears her head and has the chance to be quiet for a little while is probably going to find what she most needs, however she defines it.
Well, the interesting thing about that is I'm sure there are a lot of people who think about silence and think of it as being isolated. But you point out that actually by seeking out this silence, you become more connected as a result.
I'm so happy you noticed that exactly. That's the heart of the book, really, that when I go on silence retreat, I always feel guilty to be leaving my mother and my wife behind. But as soon as I step into that very active silence and the quiet and freedom from distraction, actually, I remember everyone I really care about. They often feel closer to me when they're in the same room and when I'm just racing from the laptop to the TV. And I feel I can go back and give them much more than if I'm just stumbling from the bank to the pharmacy in the course of my daily life. And of course, when I go there as a visitor, a retreatant, I have this beautiful room to myself above the ocean and absolute peace and quiet. But of course, the monks, when I stay with them, are working around the clock to look after their guests and to look after one another. And so I think being there taught me that solitude is really just a gateway to a richer sense of community and compassion. And that it's when I take the time to take a deep breath that I draw much closer to the people that I care for.
Well, you wrote this book when there were multiple sad things, stressful things happening in your life. Tell us a little bit about how time at this monastery and spending time in silence help you deal with those challenges in your life.
Yes. Well, I remember one time when I was sitting here in Japan and I suddenly got a call that my father had been rushed into the hospital with pneumonia, and I flew over to be by his side. And my mother and I were with him for 2 weeks, and then he passed away relatively young. And so it was a very busy time. I'm my parents' only child. I had to look after my mother and organize the memorial, the obituary, receive all the condolence calls, contact all the insurance companies. And I didn't know how to clear my head. And so one day when I was sure my mother was well looked after, I made that 4-hour drive. And I just sat on a bench on the monastery road overlooking the sea, listening to the waves below, hearing the bells ring, hearing the bees buzzing around the lavender. And somehow being connected to all those things that don't seem to change made the fact of change and impermanence much less scary. And somehow that was the medicine I most needed, just grounding myself in something much larger than I am and much larger than my concerns and anxieties, in the natural world and in the sound of the bells that speak for this 1,000-year-old discipline that will continue long after I have gone. So you're right. I think any life we have to go through so many challenges. And my question for myself is, what can I bring to the ICU? When I or my loved ones are suddenly in the intensive care unit, what do I have to bring to them? And I think it's the times that I've spent in silence, much more than the times when I've spent racing around on the freeway, that are really bolstering my inner savings account.
I'm talking with Pico Iyer about Aflame, learning from silence, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. I want to ask you about some specific advice, but let's talk a little bit more about the book first and what readers are going to find here, because it's a combination of information you want to share with them, but also sort of essays and just sort of stories about what you've accomplished through being at that monastery over decades.
Yes, and of course, I begin with fire because it's a constant visitor in the hills of California. And the monks that I stay with are living on 900 acres of remote wilderness in central California, so they're always being encircled by fire. And one time, not long ago, a fire broke out on the property next to theirs. Nearly all the monks had to race out for their lives. 3 stayed behind to help the firefighters save their property. And one day, the prior who had stayed behind sent out a letter to concerned friends like myself. And he said, "There's smoke everywhere. We can see pulsing lights. There are roars of orange flames behind the ridge 200 yards away from us. But don't worry, we're maintaining our offices. We're doing vigils and matins and vespers in the chapter room. Blessed day all." And he wrote "Blessed day all" on the very day it looked as if he could lose his life or lose everything he knew or cared about. And of course, that comes from his faith. But I think in this time of anxiety and uncertainty for so many of us, to see models of that kind of courage and confidence really moving and really inspiring. So whenever I'm worried about myself, I think about my monk friends and their unswerving fidelity and confidence that things will work out well, and I get heart from that.
I'm imagining different ways people can use this book. I mean, there may be some people just want to sit down and just kind of read it straight through. But for me, it was the sort of thing where I would read something and then I need to pause and reflect on that. Because I felt if I just, tried to rush through it, I'd lose what you were trying to say.
That's the perfect response. I'm so happy you said that, because I wrote it in a very, very slow way, at a kind of human pace, as you saw, partly to rescue the poor reader from this world of rush and distraction that's got us in a kind of whirlwind. And so, again, as you say, I worked hard to give it a narrative arc and a story, but my hope was that each section would be almost a little parable, and that you could open the book at any page and read just for a page or two, and maybe feel calmer and maybe have something to stay with you. So you read it in exactly the way I hope somebody would take it in.
I have a question for you also about how someone might be able to implement in their lives, because not everybody can go to a monastery. So how do you find time and space in your life to seek out that silence and get the benefits from it?
Perfect question, because yes, I'm aware I'm very lucky to be able to have the time and resources to go on retreat for maybe 3 days every season. Most people can't, but if you can't, I would say take a walk. Go and visit a friend without your cell phone. Try at spare moments in the day, instead of killing time, to restore time. So, for example, I used to be sitting in this apartment here and waiting for my wife to come back from work. And I never knew if it'd be 20 minutes or 70 minutes. So I just killed time. I scroll through the internet or turn on the TV. There was never anything interesting on TV. And then I thought, wait a minute, why don't I just turn off the lights and listen to some music? And I was amazed that just by doing that and disabling my senses and allowing myself to do nothing in some ways, I felt so much fresher when I heard her key in the door. I woke up so much, I slept much better, I woke up much less jangled. And I think the more one's tempted to say, I don't have enough time, the more one needs to take time. Because I think so many of us are caught in this vicious cycle whereby we're in such a hurry, we can't see what a hurry we're in. And we need to do something probably every day to free ourselves from that. So as you say, not everybody can go on retreat, but I think everybody each day can go for a run, can swim, can practice yoga, whatever form it takes. But I think we need to remove ourselves from the accelerating roar of the world if we're to recall what really matters.
This book is filled with stories, and I wonder if you would share maybe one or two stories of some of the inspirational people you've met along this journey and what they taught you.
Yeah, so one of the many surprises of staying in the monastery is not just that they open their door to everybody, but there are actually women living around the property of this all-male community, including one woman called Therese, a French-Canadian artist who lived there until she was 97, very recently, in a little canyon next to the monks' enclosure, and the monks looked after her until her dying breath. And so she was a lay person and living a life previously in the world, just like most of us, but she had realized that silence would bring her to her deepest self. And I was very touched whenever I spoke to her. She had more time to contemplate than the monks, who were very busy. And I remember when she lost her husband, she said, "It's a terrible loss. My life's partner is gone, but now I have more silence. Now I have more solitude." Terrible storms would come and wipe out the trees that she'd been sustaining. And she'd say, "I miss my trees. They're like my best friends, but now I can see more clearly the ocean." And I felt that I was getting a kind of ageless universal wisdom from almost everybody I met in the community, male and female, whether they're actually official monks or just people going there to participate in the very special silence that the monks create.
We've touched upon a few things here. There's much more in the book we won't have time to talk about. But what are some of the key concepts that you hope people are going to take away from the book?
So I call this book Aflame because, and then I actually flew back into California and to my mother's rebuilt home last month, just as the flames were remaking the whole of Los Angeles and upending so many lives. And I use fire as a metaphor because I think all of us are facing two questions. How do we stay calm in this world of uncertainty? And how do we stay hopeful in the midst of impermanence? And so I'd say the book is about fires roaring in on people and how we can stay absolutely centered and confident in the midst of many threats. And I know in Kansas it's probably hurricanes and typhoons and floods and other things, but everybody in the world is facing the pandemic previously and natural challenges now. How do we stay calm in the midst of that? And I found this little medicine that's really helped me. And so I share it with my friends, and now I'm sharing it with my readers. Maybe this will help you as much as it's helped me for half a lifetime.
Well, there's much more in this book than we had time to talk about. So to learn more, the book is Aflame, Learning from Silence by Pico Iyer. Pico, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you. It's a real joy, Dan, and thank you for inviting me.
If you'd like to purchase Aflame, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.